January 16, 1945. Tuesday, -10 degrees Celsius, clear, calm, with some clouds only in the east.
Juhász Eszter, 22 years old. District 11. Orlery Street 4. We slept in the warm room until 8:30 and only woke up to the explosions that shattered the last window in the kitchen into tiny shards. The neighboring college tennis court was bombed, which was also no more than 50 meters away. I'm really curious if our apartment will survive. The Germans here were very surprised that there hasn't been a revolution here yet, and they said that the Russians are supposedly not such bad people. They will destroy the Germans and the Arrow Cross, but they are not dangerous to the others. The Germans do not believe in either the relief troops or in victory. This is no wonder, they have so many losses and wounded, very little food, and no medicine at all. About 60,000 of them are surrounded here, and they say, let what must come, just let it be over.
Lux Gyula,
60 years old college teacher, District 12.
Since we are forced to be together with the caretakers in the basement, this togetherness is starting to become quite unpleasant at times. Since the caretaker's wife was injured, she has been constantly moaning, sometimes complaining about her head, sometimes her back, sometimes her leg. Her daughter continues the moaning, also complaining about this or that. And if they are not moaning, they pray loudly for hours on end. As a result of the terrible war situation, we are completely cut off from the world, so much so that we can barely even contact the neighbors. For 3 weeks now, there has been no change in our situation. The Germans are holding the front firmly, and the Russians cannot advance. Thus, we are practically caught between the two fronts. By the way, I had great luck again today. To make a little more space for us in the basement, I took some unnecessary things out to the garden. I had barely been out there when there was a huge explosion in the garden, and the air pressure pressed me against the wall. Luckily, no shrapnel hit me, but the air pressure stunned me a bit. The Germans' behavior is incomprehensible. It is obvious that they have already lost this war. So what is the point of them still holding the front here, driving themselves and us to ruin?
Lajos Nagy,
61-year-old writer and bookstore owner. Pest, District 6.
There's something else I have to say about the sound of the explosions. This sound is nerve-wracking. Deathly threatening. But even more terrible than that is the drone of the airplane. The explosion is something that comes with the immediate realization, I survived this. But the roar of the plane is the threat of agonizing death itself. It creates anticipation. Now, the explosion will come any minute and you will be torn to 1,000 pieces, body and soul. At night, when I'm not asleep yet, I still imagine that now the bomb is falling, right on us and, oh, maybe I'm not even alive anymore.
Déri Tibor,
50 years old writer. District 5, Nador Street. By then we had already heard that the Germans were retreating street by street, defending each house separately, and some of us even thought we knew that they wanted to set up a machine gun post on one of our intact balconies and would also defend the basement. The terrified residents decided to send a delegation to the commanding officer. I was assigned to accompany the air raid warden. This choice, in a rather amusing way, already signaled the sudden shift in the balance of power, just as before. As the front approached Nador Street, the residents had become increasingly polite and courteous to my mother. I knew that the Germans had finally lost the war when one day the caretaker's wife greeted me first. Upstairs, in the ground floor apartment where we visited the officer in the evening, a woman from the house was making coffee for the soldiers in the front room. They were lying on the floor of the room, exhausted, in a daze of fatigue, their limbs sprawled, almost helpless. They were mostly young kids. I felt not hatred, but rather pity for them. Probably because of their youth. But beneath my compassion, the latent anger and contempt, which was directed against the whole nation, continued to fuel my emotions for a long time. I remember word for word what one of the young soldiers said to me then, with dry despair in his voice. "We cannot hold them anymore," he said with a Prussian accent, "they are too strong." That they couldn't handle the Russians anymore, meaning that I was saved.
Fenyő Miksa,
66 years old writer, lawyer. Pest, District 8. Haransky Street 11. At 2 in the morning, the Russians occupied the school building. It happened like this: a few minutes before 2, the inspection servant reported that someone was knocking loudly on the door. He didn't know if it was Germans or Russians. The 2 Josses got up, the others followed their example. I, anticipating a visit, had already gone to bed dressed. By the time we were ready, the Russians were already inside, and they entered the basement. We didn't understand a word of theirs, they didn't understand a word of ours, but they saw our sincere joy. They inquired about rifles and Germans, and set off to search the basement. Their leader, a well-built, likable-faced, excellently dressed young Cossack, stayed with us. We offered him a cigarette, he didn't accept it. He showed that he had enough cigarettes, even cigars. Dixie the cat caught his attention. He played with her kindly, said a few kind words to Grandma, and stated that the basement picture was very artistic. At least that's how Ria understood it. He might have said something completely different. Meanwhile, Tibor, in a fluttering nightshirt, slippers, and floating hair, led them to the neighboring basement rooms. They were warmly interested in Katie, who was seriously ill, and they carried out the whole inspection kindly and attentively. Jossie and Elvira accompanied them to the room where the military belongings were stored. "Are there any weapons here?" they asked. "No," was the information. Jossie knew that much. They reach into the inside of the car tire, they find hand grenades there. No problem. One of the Russians, who is moving his bayonet more decisively, is waved off by the Cossack leader. Then they gave the order that everyone should lie down. They went upstairs to install a telephone. What organizational skills! We would have said if the Germans had seen it that way. We lay down, the Russians worked until 5, and then they left. At 7 o'clock a new troop arrived, Romanians. Less kind than the Russians, but on the whole correct. The important thing with these was also the search for the German ski. An hour later, they also withdrew.